I was hammering a bar of glowing steel when the knock came, not a polite rap. Not the usual hesitant tap of a customer who knew better than to interrupt a smith mid-strike. This was a thunderous boom, boom, boom that made the entire forge jump. The heavy oak door rattled on its hinges like it was about to splinter. My hammer froze halfway down, the ringing note dying in the air as if someone had strangled the sound itself. The whole forge of silvering went still. The fire still roared in the hearth, the heat still rolled up toward the blackened rafters, but every other sound, the hiss of quenching oil, the distant clatter of tools, even my own breathing, simply stopped. I stood there. Sweat and soot streaked down my arms, hammer still raised, heart suddenly hammering louder than the steel ever could. My name is Elric Vane, 25 years old. Born on the border, raised between the axe and the anvil. I inherited this forge from my father, who inherited it from his. A long line of men who only ever understood hot iron, lamp oil, and the rhythm of the hammer like a second heartbeat. People say I have hands that can hear metal. I know the exact temperature by the color of the glow. I know the impurities by the way the grain runs. But people also laugh behind my back for one very simple reason. I can read steel better than I can read people. Outside the door, the voice came again, low, heavy, carrying authority that didn't need to shout to make knees weak. "Elric Vane, open the door! You're fired!" I took a slow breath, set the hammer down on the anvil with a dull clink, and wiped my hands on my leather apron. The motion only smeared more soot across my palms. Then I walked to the door, pulled the heavy iron bolt, and the hinges screamed like they were in pain. And there she was. Braca. She filled the entire doorway like a living mountain, 7 feet tall if she was an inch, shoulders broad enough to block the morning light. Her skin was the deep moss green of ancient forest after rain, crossed with old white scars that ran across her powerful arms like exposed roots. 2 thick ivory tusks curved upward from her lower lip, sharp and polished. Her black hair was braided into dozens of warrior ropes, each one threaded with small iron rings that caught the firelight. Her armor, layered leather reinforced with dark steel plates, bore the etched symbol of her clan, a bare skull flanked by crossed axes. And her eyes. Her eyes were the color of molten amber, flecked with green, and right now they were locked on me with the kind of focus usually reserved for a blade about to fall. She stepped inside without waiting for permission. The forge suddenly felt too small. The heat from the hearth seemed to shrink away from her. "Commander Braca," I stammered. "Don't call me Commander," she said. Her voice was deep, resonant, the kind that didn't need volume to command attention. "You make me tired, Elric Vane." I swallowed hard. What did I do wrong?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she lifted one massive hand, and a hand big enough to crush my skull without effort, and held it out between us. Resting on her calloused palm was a thick leather bracelet, the clan sigil burned deep into the hide, the skull, and crossed axes. "You never wore it," she said. I stared at the bracelet. My brain felt like cold iron, slow, heavy, refusing to bend. I didn't want to damage it, I managed. "I put it on the shelf to keep it safe." Braca's lip curled. It wasn't quite a smile. It was something far more dangerous. "You put a promise on the shelf," she said, "like it was decoration." My mouth opened, closed, opened again. I had no idea what promise she was talking about. She took one step closer. The scent of oiled leather, pine smoke, and something sharp like mountain wind rolled off her. Then she spoke, each word falling like a hammer on the anvil. "I have been courting you for 8 months by the customs of my people. I brought weapons that didn't need fixing. I sat here and watched you work. I asked about your life. I left you my protection charm, mountain tea, the clan bracelet. I thought you understood." I stood rooted to the floor, the heat of the forge suddenly feeling distant. "But you didn't understand," she continued. Her voice dropped, growing colder. "You treated me like a customer." She looked at me for one last, long second, those amber eyes burning with something that looked dangerously close to pain. "So, from today onward, You are fired from existing in my life." She turned and walked out. The door didn't slam. It didn't need to. The silence she left behind was louder than any crash. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway where she had been, the bracelet still sitting on my workbench where I had placed it weeks ago like just another trinket. And for the first time in my life, the forge felt cold. If anyone ever asked me where it all truly began, I would tell them it started with a perfectly good battle axe that was brought in only to be called dull. The first time Braca stepped into the Silver Ring Forge, I honestly thought she wouldn't fit through the door. She had to duck her head and turn sideways, her broad shoulders brushing the frame. She moved with the quiet power of someone who had spent her life walking through war camps rather than ballrooms. Without a word, she unslung the massive double-bladed axe from her back and set it on my workbench with surprising gentleness. The heavy oak surface still groaned under its weight. "Dull," she said. One word, deep, rough, shaped by an orc throat that wasn't made for the common tongue. "Fix it." I picked up the axe. The edge was sharp enough to shave with. The balance was perfect. The steel had that clean high ring when I tapped it with my knuckle. I looked up at her. "It's in excellent condition," I told her honestly. "Whoever forged this knew what they were doing." Her amber eyes narrowed slightly. "It is dull. Fix it." I fixed it. I spent the next 4 hours sharpening, rebalancing the grip, and polishing out microscopic scratches that only another smith would ever notice. When she returned at sunset, the sky bleeding red and gold through the forge windows, I handed the axe back to her. She ran her thumb along the edge exactly the way I had. Then, without hesitation, she placed 3 silver coins in my palm instead of the 2 we had agreed on. "Quality deserves proper payment," she said. I thought, a good customer. She came back 2 weeks later with a sword that supposedly had a loose pommel. It didn't. 3 weeks after that, a dagger that felt unbalanced. It wasn't. A month later, a war mace she claimed didn't sit right in the hand. It sat perfectly. Each time the flaw was imaginary. Each time I still fixed it, and each time she stayed longer. At first, she only stood by the door and watched. Then she started asking questions while I worked. "How long have you been forging?" "Since I was 10. My father started teaching me young." She nodded slowly, as if filing the answer away like a blade. "You live alone?" "Yes." A pause. "Do you ever get lonely?" I always answered the way I answered customers who asked about my craft. I stay busy. I'm used to the quiet. The quiet helps me think. Old Hob, the coal delivery man with only 3 fingers on his left hand, noticed her on her 3rd visit. He clicked his tongue 3 times, his habit before saying anything important, and watched her leave the forge. "Odd," he said. "I have good hands," I replied. He gave me that knowing, pitying smile. "Aye, good hands you've got." Then there was Lysa, the baker's daughter, who liked to sit on the fence outside and collect the iron scraps I threw away to turn into little trinkets. One afternoon, while Braca stood inside watching me temper a blade, Lisa tugged my sleeve and whispered, "She likes you." "She likes my work," I corrected. Lisa stared at me like I had just suggested the sky was green. "No, she likes you." I laughed it off. "She's an orc. She's a commander." "So?" Lisa shot back. "You think orcs don't know how to like someone?" I didn't answer, because at that exact moment Braca placed something new on my workbench, a small bone carving of a wolf, intricately detailed, no bigger than my thumb. "What's this?" I asked. "A protection charm," she said. "The wolf guards the door." I put it on the shelf. Later came the pouch of mountain tea that smelled of pine and spice. "Drink it in winter," she told me. "It warms the blood." And I put it on the shelf. Then came the thick leather clan bracelet. She set it down while I was in the middle of tempering steel. I asked why. She was quiet for a long time before answering. "I thought you might wear it." I examined the craftsmanship, the beveled edges, the tight stitching. The clan sigil burned perfectly into the hide. It must have taken her 3 full days. I praised the work honestly. Then I put it on the shelf thinking it would stay cleaner there. Braca watched me do it. Her expression was the same one I see when steel cools too fast and cracks, disappointment mixed with something heavier. The only thing I ever made without thinking was the iron rose. It happened during one of her earlier visits. She had brought the axe again, claiming it needed sharpening. While it heated in the forge, I found a small scrap of iron that was useless for anything practical. My hands moved on their own. A stem, delicate petals, even tiny thorns no larger than a grain of wheat. I lost myself in the work and forgot she was even there. When I finished, I held it up to the firelight. The petals caught the glow in shades of gray and black, imperfect, asymmetrical, beautiful in its own small way. "Here," I said, offering it to her without thinking. "For you. Just scrap." She stared at the tiny rose in my soot-stained palm like I had handed her a living heart. Her massive fingers reached out slowly, carefully, as though afraid the flower would vanish if she moved too quickly. When she took it, it looked absurdly small in her hand. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I had never heard her whisper before. "It's just scrap metal shaped into something pretty," I said, already turning back to her axe. "I'm glad you like it." If her expression shifted into something that looked like pain, I didn't notice. I was too busy checking the temperature of the steel, and still, I understood nothing. Until the day she stopped bringing weapons altogether. She came with a decision instead. The day I finally understood everything, I did the stupidest thing possible. I panicked and stayed silent. Sarka arrived at the forge on a cold gray morning. She was shorter than Braca by a head, but no less imposing, with a jagged scar that split her upper lip and left one tusk permanently exposed. She sat on the low stone wall outside and began sharpening her sword with slow, angry strokes. The wet stone scraped against steel like fingernails on a coffin lid. I stepped out to draw water from the barrel. The moment she saw me, her eyes narrowed into slits. "You really don't know, do you?" she asked. "Know what?" Sarka stopped sharpening. The silence was worse than the scraping. "My commander doesn't need her axe sharpened 3 times a week," she said. "She doesn't need her sword balanced or her dagger re-edged. She came here to see you. Every gift she left, the wolf charm, the mountain tea, the clan bracelet, those are courtship tokens in our culture. She wore the iron rose you made against her heart. Every single day." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. She actually wore it?" Sarka's voice went flat. "She cried, actual tears, because the man she was courting called her promise scrap." I stood frozen, the bucket forgotten in my hand. "What are you going to do about it?" she demanded. I'll talk to her," I lied. But when Braca came 3 days later carrying a spear she claimed had lost its balance, I did exactly what I always did when things got too big for me. I froze. I picked up the spear, set it down, picked it up again. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Finally, the words burst out of me like steam from overheated iron. "Your weapons. They're always perfect. They never actually need fixing. I know you're not coming here for repairs." Braca went completely still, the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm breaks. "So you knew," she said quietly. I didn't know how I felt. I only know steel. Feelings don't need knowledge," she cut in. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the iron beneath it. "They only need to exist or not." I said nothing. That silence was the worst answer I could have given. Braca looked at me for one long, final moment. Something in her amber eyes cracked and then sealed over, hard as cooled steel. "Then the answer is no," she said. She turned toward the door. "Wait!" I started, but the word came out weak and useless. Braca paused at the threshold, her broad back filling the frame. "I won't come back," she said without turning around. "Find another customer for your excellent work, Elric Vane." The door closed behind her with a soft final click. She didn't slam it. She didn't need to. The silence she left behind was louder than any crash. For the first time in my life, the forge felt cold. The days that followed were wrong in every way. The hammer still rang against the anvil. The fire still roared. The steel still sang its clear, perfect note. But the rhythm was off, like a heart that had forgotten its beat. Old Hob came to deliver coal, took one look at me, and clicked his tongue 3 times. "You look like death walked over your grave and decided to move in," he said. "I'm fine." "Uh-huh." He dumped the coal with more force than necessary. Fine, like a man who just chopped off his own foot and says he's still going for a walk. Lysa was less gentle. She stormed into the forge the next afternoon, all righteous fury in a flour-dusted apron, and pointed straight at the shelf where Braca's gifts still sat untouched. "You hurt her," she said. "I didn't mean to." "Mean to or not, you still did it. Strong people break too. They just break quieter." I stared at the wolf carving, the pouch of tea, the thick leather bracelet. I stared at the empty space on the workbench where Braca used to stand, taking up half the forge and, I now realized, half the air inside my chest. I tried to make another iron rose. I spent 6 hours shaping it, making every petal more perfect than the first. When I finished, I held it up to the light. It was beautiful. Technically flawless, it was also completely empty. I smashed it back into scrap with 3 savage blows. A full month passed. I barely slept. I lay awake on the narrow cot above the forge every night, staring at the ceiling beams and hearing Braca's last words echo in the dark. I won't come back. The forge kept working, but I wasn't really there. My hands moved on their own while my mind stayed stuck on amber eyes and the scent of pine after rain. Then one gray morning Sarka appeared again. This time she didn't sharpen her sword. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "She's not well," Sarka said without greeting. "She's taken solo patrol duty in the disputed territories. She's volunteering for missions that should require an entire squad. She's trying to get herself killed." My heart turned to ice. "Where?" I asked. Sarka studied me for a long moment, as if deciding whether I was worth the trouble. Finally she spoke. "The old watchtower by the Blackwater River. 3 days' ride." I didn't think. I simply walked to the door, pulled the heavy iron key from my belt, and locked the silver ring forge for the first time in my life. I was going after her. I had never left Silver Ring for more than a single afternoon in my life. I knew every mountain that held iron ore, every path that turned to mud after rain, but knowing a road is not the same as walking it. I borrowed an old gray mare from the stables behind the bakery. The saddle felt strange under me, the reins too slippery in my calloused hands. I packed a small bag with bread, dried meat, a water skin, and the iron rose I had made for her, the real one, not the smashed scrap. Lysa ran out as I was leaving and shoved another pouch of hard biscuits into my hands. "Now don't be stupid," she said, eyes bright with worry and something like pride. I smiled weakly. Too late for that. The first day was humiliating. The mare had opinions and none of them matched mine. I bounced in the saddle like a sack of grain. My thighs burned after only 2 hours. By the time the sun began to set, I had already fallen off once when she decided to stop suddenly for a patch of grass. I lay in the dirt, staring at the sky, wondering what kind of idiot rides 4 days into disputed territory for a woman who told him never to come back. But every time doubt crept in, I saw Braca's face in the forge doorway, that final look of quiet pain, and I forced myself back into the saddle. The second day I got lost. The main road forked 3 times, and I chose wrong each time. I ended up in a narrow ravine where the walls pressed so close the mare could barely turn around. Rain started at dusk, cold and relentless. I huddled under an overhang with the horse, both of us shivering, and whispered to her like she could understand. "I know, I'm an idiot, but she's out there alone because of me." The third day the rain turned to sleet. My cloak was soaked through. My hands were numb on the reins. I kept riding anyway, teeth chattering, mind replaying every moment I had missed, the way she lingered after every visit, the way she asked if I ever got lonely, the way she placed the clan bracelet on my bench and waited, hoping I would understand. I hadn't. Night fell on the third day, and I still had half a day's ride left. I didn't stop. I rode through moonlight and freezing wind until the mare refused to go further. We slept in a shallow cave, her warmth against my back the only thing keeping me from freezing. On the morning of the 4th day, the old watchtower finally appeared on the ridge above the Blackwater River. The stone structure stood lonely against the gray sky, wind howling around its broken battlements. Below, the river roared black and angry between sharp rocks. And there she was. Braca sat on a flat boulder near the tower's base, sharpening a long sword that clearly did not need sharpening. Her movements were mechanical, almost angry. Her armor looked worn, a fresh scratch running across the shoulder plate. She looked smaller somehow. Not in size, she was still the same towering orc warrior, but in spirit, like something vital had been dimmed. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought she might hear it from where I stood. I slid off the mare, legs so stiff I nearly collapsed. The horse snorted in relief and immediately began cropping the thin grass, and I took 3 unsteady steps forward. Braca's head snapped up. Her amber eyes widened for half a heartbeat, surprise, maybe even hope, before the wall slammed back into place. Her expression turned guarded, cold as the river behind her. "Blacksmith," she said. Her voice carried across the wind, flat and distant. "You're far from your forge." I kept walking until I stood 10 paces away. My legs shook, but not just from the ride. "I came because I heard you were taking solo patrols, dangerous ones." "Not your concern." She looked away, back to the sword in her hands. The whetstone scraped once, twice. The sound grated against the silence. I swallowed hard. My mouth felt full of dust. "I moved on the wolf charm from the shelf to the table beside my bed," I said. The words tumbled out, clumsy and raw. "Because I finally understood it wasn't decoration. It was a promise." The whetstone stopped moving. "I drink the mountain tea every morning now," I continued, voice cracking. "It's bitter and strong, and it makes me think of you the moment I taste it." Braca still wouldn't look at me, but her shoulders had gone rigid. "I wear the clan bracelet," I said, lifting my left wrist so she could see the thick leather band with her sigil burned into it. "I should have worn it the day you gave it to me. I should have understood what it meant. I should have understood what you meant." The wind howled between us. The river roared below. Braca finally turned her head. Her amber eyes were bright, too bright, glistening with something she was fighting hard to keep inside. "You remember me," she said, the words rough, almost accusatory. "Because your forge is quiet now, or because it's me?" "Because it's you." My voice broke on the last word. "Because every time the hammer strikes the anvil, I wait for the sound of your footsteps. Because the forge feels wrong without you standing there watching me work like I was doing something worth watching. Because when you left, the silence came back, Sam, and I finally realized how empty it had always been." Braca stood slowly, all 7 feet of her armored and scarred and impossibly beautiful in the gray morning light. She looked at me like I was a blade she wasn't sure would hold its edge. "I thought I had lost you," she whispered. "You never lost me," I said, stepping closer. "I was just too stupid to realize I was already yours." She took 1 step toward me, then another. The distance between us disappeared until I had to tilt my head back to meet her eyes. "If you hurt me again," she said, voice low and trembling, "I will not come back. Not ever." I reached up and gently touched the iron rose that still hung from the cord around her neck, slightly bent, slightly worn, but kept like the most precious thing in the world. "I won't," I promised. "I'll learn. The way I learned to forge steel, slowly, carefully until it's right. Until I'm right for you." Braca's breath shuddered out of her. A single tear escaped and traced down her green cheek before she could stop it. And for the first time since I had known her, the towering orc commander looked fragile. We didn't fix everything with pretty words or grand promises. We simply sat down together on the cold stone beside the Blackwater River and let the truth spill out between us like water over rocks. Braca spoke first, her voice low and rough from days of silence. "For 8 months, I came to your forge like it was the only safe place left in the world," she said, staring at the rushing black water. "No one looked at me like an enemy there. No one waited for me to make a mistake so they could call me savage. I brought weapons that didn't need fixing just so I could stand in the heat and watch you work. I asked about your life because I wanted to know the man behind the hammer. I left you my protection charm, the mountain tea, the clan bracelet, every single one of them a step in the old courtship dance of my people. And every time you put them on the shelf like ordinary things, something inside me cracked a little more. I listened, throat tight, the wind whipping her braids against her armored shoulders. I thought maybe you were shy, she continued, or that humans did things differently. But the iron rose. When you handed me that little scrap of metal and called it nothing, I felt it break. I kept it anyway, wore it against my heart every day, even when it hurt to look at. She reached into her armor and pulled out the small iron rose on its cord. It was slightly bent now, the petals darkened from constant wear, but still unmistakably mine. I took a shaky breath and told her my side. I spent a whole month after you left realizing how empty the forge had become, I said. The hammer still rang, but the sound was wrong. Every strike reminded me there used to be someone standing there watching, like what I did mattered. I moved the wolf charm to the table beside my bed so it was the first thing I saw every morning. I drank your tea even though it was bitter and strange because it made me think of you. I finally put on the clan bracelet and felt like the biggest fool alive for waiting so long. I looked up at her, the wind stinging my eyes. I was never good at seeing what people felt. I only knew steel. But when you were gone, I finally understood what I had lost. I understood that I had been falling for you for 8 months and was too blind to notice. Braca's breath hitched. For the first time since I had known her, the unbreakable orc commander looked fragile. The sun was sinking low, painting the river gold and red. I stood up. She stood too. The height difference made everything awkward and perfect at the same time. I had to rise onto my toes. She had to bend down. Our foreheads bumped gently, then our noses. Then our lips met in the clumsiest, most honest kiss I had ever known. Her tusks pressed lightly against my cheek. My hands found her waist, small against the breadth of her armor. She tasted like mountain wind and steel and something warm I couldn't name. When we pulled apart, a single tear had escaped down her green cheek and caught on the curve of her tusk like a drop of silver. I thought I had lost you, she whispered again, voice breaking. You never lost me, I answered, brushing the tear away with my thumb. I was just too slow to realize I was already yours. The next morning we rode back to Silvering together. I still sat the horse like a sack of potatoes, but Braca refused to ride ahead. She walked beside me the entire way, one hand resting lightly on the mare's neck, glancing up every few minutes to make sure I hadn't fallen off. When the familiar rooftops of the town appeared, Hob and Lisa were already waiting outside the forge. Lisa's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw us. Hob clicked his tongue 3 times, then muttered, "About damn time." Braca had to duck to enter the forge. She looked around at the familiar space, or the anvil, the hearth, the shelf where her gifts had once waited like forgotten promises, and something in her shoulders eased. From that day on, she moved into the small room above the forge. The doorway was too low and the bed far too small, so we spent 3 days building a new one together. Thick oak frame and a heavy iron headboard I forged myself, wide enough for a warrior and a blacksmith and whatever future we decided to make. She still brought weapons. But now, when she set a perfectly balanced sword on my workbench and said it needed sharpening, I would test the edge, look at her with a small smile, and say, "This blade is flawless and you know it." Braca would answer with that rare private smile she saved only for me. "I just wanted to watch you work." And every night, after the forge grew quiet and the town slept, she would place the iron rose in my hand and I would close my fingers around it, around her, around the promise I had almost lost. One evening, as the fire crackled low and the scent of mountain tea filled the room, Braca took my hand, her massive green fingers gentle around my smaller ones, and spoke the old words of her clan in a voice soft as embers. "By iron and blood, by fire and choice, I bind my life to yours. What is mine is yours. What is yours is mine, until the mountains fall and the rivers run dry." I answered the only way I knew how. "I promise I will never put your promises on the shelf again." She laughed then, A real laugh, deep and warm, and pulled me close. The forge no longer felt empty. It felt full of heat, full of life, full of the steady rhythm of two hearts learning to beat as one. Outside, the town of Silvering slept under the stars. Inside, a human blacksmith and an orc commander built something new from the broken pieces of old fears. And for the first time in my life, the sound of the hammer against the anvil didn't feel like work. It felt like home.